And joining us now, the Assemblyman John Wisniewski, Democrat leading the Joint Investigative Committee into Bridgegate and other Christie scandals. And first of all, Assemblyman, thank you so much for the time. And I'm curious your take when that report came out from the internal investigation that concluded, quote, that there isn't a shred of evidence that the governor knew what Kelly and Wildstein were doing. When you read that, among other findings in the report, what was your take?
Well, my take was, where's the evidence? I think it's one thing to have the attorney bought and paid for by the Christie administration read a report saying the Christie administration has had no involvement in this. But what I'd like to see is, what did they base that decision on? What did they base that conclusion on? There's reference in this report to 70 interviews, yet we have not seen any of those transcripts of those interviews. We do not know what was said in those interviews. All we know is the characterization by the author of the report of what those interviews were. But we're not allowed to see for ourselves. That's very disturbing.
Well, you're going to rectify that, isn't that right? You're going to be subpoenaing those documents, notes, and recordings that they used for their investigation. What do you hope to learn from them?
Well, I'd like to know what the governor said in his interview with the investigators. I'd like to know what all of the other key principal players of the administration said about their knowledge of this event. We can't draw any reliable conclusions based on what we know so far. And I think that it is hard to justify the conclusions that Randy Mastro drew. If you look at the report and you look at the footnotes, the citations to the conclusions, in many respects, those footnotes refer back to news articles. This is almost a complete circle. The report is making conclusions based on what reporters wrote about documents that this committee made public earlier this year. But there seems to be a lack of support in the report by any objective measure to any of the reports or the interviews, rather, that were conducted by Gibson Dunn.
You know, over the weekend, Senate Majority Leader Loretta Weinberg said on Meet the Press that if Christie came before your committee, she'd be satisfied, implying that if he was forthcoming, that could end the investigation. Do you agree with that threshold? As long as he sits before you and answers the questions as directly as possible, that might be all you need?
Well, I'm not sure that's a fair characterization of what Senator Weinberg said. I watched the same interview and I've spoken to Senator Weinberg. But let me be clear. This is not an investigation about Chris Christie. This is an investigation about lane closures on the George Washington Bridge that, in part, were traced back to a person in the governor's office. We know that Bridget Kelly sent the email that put this into motion. What we don't know is why. We don't know who told her to do it. We don't know under what authority she was given to do this. These are questions that are outstanding. Now, many people have suspected that the governor may have had some involvement. It may have been related to his re-election campaign. We don't have conclusions to that. But if the governor were to come before the committee, it may end our inquiry. It may not. I don't know what he'll say, and I don't know what other information we'll need. So I think it's far too early to say that this is really simply a matter of Chris Christie coming before the committee. The committee certainly has the authority to issue him a subpoena, and under my understanding of the law, he'd have an obligation to come before the committee. Let's see if we get to that.
You know, after the release of this said report, the attorney for Bridget Kelly, after she was singled out again, not just in the report, but in Randy Mastro's press conference, and we know what happened in that 2-hour press conference the governor did, he was pretty clear, the attorney, saying that if Ms. Kelly were provided with the appropriate procedural safeguards, she would be fully cooperative with the probe. Translation, Assemblyman, if she gets full immunity here, she'd tell you everything she knows. How close are we to that reality?
Well, again, I think that a close reading of the statement that was issued on behalf of Ms. Kelly talks about federal prosecutors, federal authorities, and their investigation. Clearly, the committee, there's a debate going on right now about the extent to which the committee can offer immunity. We have subpoenaed documents. There's an ongoing court case. We're waiting for a decision from Judge Jacobson on that decision. We'd like to know whether we have the authority and we can compel Ms. Kelly to provide the documents the committee needs to continue its investigation. So I think we're, again, a little ahead of ourselves before we can get to those conclusions.
I know you're an attorney, and maybe you can help with this, because I brought on a lot of legal experts, and everybody seems to agree that from the smell test, there was an abuse of power that went on with the lane closures. But was there a crime? And they said to get better acceleration through this process, if a crime was actually committed, then the process could move more clearly and you'd get more cooperation, arguably. But people can't find what the exact crime is. Can you point to a crime that was committed when those lanes were closed?
We're not a law enforcement agency, and I think that the sight of that gets lost in the debate that goes on about this investigation. Our charge as an investigative committee is to understand how this could happen, not for the purpose of prosecution. Our charge is to understand how it could happen so we can change the laws to make sure it doesn't happen again. Our mission is different than the mission that Mr. Fishman has and his agency. And so I think it's very important to separate the two. There may have been laws broken here. That's what Pat Foy said, the executive director of the Port Authority, in his email dated September 13th, his email that started the whole chain of events that's led us to this point in time. He suggested that laws have been broken on both a federal and state level. There is research that's been taken that shows laws may have been broken. We just don't know the entire fact pattern. We're going to have to wait and see what the facts reveal when we get our documents from Ms. Kelly and Mr. Stepien and we hear testimony. But let's not lose sight of the fact that what we as a legislative body are trying to accomplish is markedly different and distinct from whatever the U.S. Attorney's Office may want to accomplish.
Fair enough. Does your instinct tell you before this is all said and done, you will have Ms. Kelly, Mr. Stepien, Mr. Sampson, and others here that you really want to get their perspectives on what happened? Do you think at the end of the day you'll have them before your committee?
I think we'll get the answers that we need ultimately. There's a long process ahead of us. I think it's important for the committee to understand what prompted Bridget Kelly to send the email that she did. I think it's important to understand why Bill Stepien sent the text message to Bill Baroni congratulating him on the false testimony he gave to the Assembly Transportation Committee. I think it's important to understand why David Sampson was so upset by Pat Foy's email that ended the lane closures. I mean, clearly he was upset about it, and he talked in very negative terms about what Mr. Foy had done. I think we need to understand answers to those basic questions in order to get to the root cause of how this could happen and how the committee can act to stop it from happening again.
Assemblyman, I wish you the best of luck here, and I certainly appreciate a few minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good talking to you.